So, as we re-gear up for our fall classes, as we charge forward to the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, Tim has written a nice little song that will get us into the spirit. So these are the same, so listen to mine. Martin the German was a sorry mixed-up soul, 'cause he thought it odd that a loving God would condemn him straight to hell. Martin the German even took a sacred vow when a lightning strike nearly took his life, but St. Anne stepped in somehow. It must have seemed like magic when Romans 1:17 he found, 'cause when he read God saves by faith, he began to dance around. Oh, Martin the German felt reborn again that day, and he spread the word from Wittenberg all the way to Rome, they say. Thumpity thump, thump, thumpity thump, nailed them to the door. Thumpity thump, thump, thumpity thump, hear these PCs roar. Thank you, Tim. That was awesome.
Copyright that one.
Yes, that's right. Somebody get on that, run away. So, awesome. Thanks, Tim. That was a lot of fun. All right, well, let's say a prayer and we'll jump back into things here. Gracious God, thank you for an opportunity to look back into history, but to see what it means for us today. And so continue to guide us and be with us with your Holy Spirit. And help these sessions, help us tell our story so that others may come to know you and your grace and mercy in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Amen. Remember, what's my job? I'm a curator. I collect, organize, and I present for you. I want to tell you that this summer I read the book Brand, Luther. And this is about how the printing press and the media and Luther worked together. I shared this back when we had over 60 people crammed in room 4 to watch the 1950 whatever Luther movie. This church, there is no other pastor that has a congregation that would have 60 people come on a weeknight to watch a 1950s movie. Wow. I'm sorry, am I right, Pastor? And then the other night when we watched the public broadcast, Martin Luther, the idea changed, we had another 50 at 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night here. You guys are amazing. You might want to look at this. Anyway, I shared this little factoid back when we had the 1953 Luther movie. The number one thing that kept the printing presses going and made them money before Martin Luther, do you remember what it was? What's your guess? I'm sorry? Not that. You said indulgences, Jesse. No? Absolutely. That's exactly what kept the printing presses in business, was the printing of indulgences. That was their biggest money maker. Can you imagine that? So when Luther came around, not only was he threatening the Pope and his income stream with confronting those, but also the income of the printers. Well, guess how that worked out? Luther became their cash cow. And he took over indulgences, and his writings hit the presses, went out, were purchased, went like crazy, and made the printers a lot of money.
You might have saved more people, too.
Yes? True. True. More than the other way around. And so, how much money did Luther make on all of that? Nothing. He took 0 royalties for any of his writing. All right. So that's just a fun factoid. Let's get into reminding us where we were when we finished off back in May. So this is what we've done in this class. We've had like 14 sessions. The docudrama that we watched on Tuesday, or was that Tuesday? Yeah. Was an hour and 45 minutes, did the whole story. We've taken 14 hours, and we're only halfway. So you are getting the meat. You are not just getting a cursory overview. We've looked at Luther's family and education. We've looked at Luther's call to the monastic life and the ramifications of that, his relation to his father, what his father was hoping for, going into law school. By the way, it probably cost his dad about a year's salary to get his law books. And so Luther sells them and says, I'm going to go be a monk. Luther will later say, you know what, Dad, I'm sorry. I broke the commandment to honor your father. When I did that is interesting. We've looked at what drove Luther's hammer, with the indulgences, but his trip to Rome before that, his disillusionment with the church, and his own Affektung, this being attacked of one's conscience. It's more than depression, it's sin, guilt. He has incredibly introspective consciousness, and so he was just under this assault, and that was going on. And then his realization, as you heard us in the song, when he read Romans in particular and Galatians, that God's righteousness is something given as a gift that we receive in faith. That's what makes us righteous, and that changed everything for Luther. We looked at those writings around that. Then we looked at his key early writings, like two kinds of righteousness, Babylonian captivity of the church, his address to the German nobility, his address on Christian freedom, these seminal, amazing core documents that Luther wrote. And to this day, I think if you want to read Luther, read those. I mean, those are fantastic works. And so we looked at those and all the politics leading up to the Diet of Worms, where Luther was, called to recant. He didn't, etc. We won't go over all of that again. Here I stand. And he made his stand. Then we looked at how he was kidnapped by Prince Frederick, saved. I'm thinking that my mic is dying of, no? So we looked at that. We looked at how he was in exile in the Wartburg Castle. And what did he do? You remember what he did in the Wartburg Castle? Anybody?
Translated.
Translated the New Testament. Not the Old Testament, the New Testament. The Old Testament was a bigger thing, although he did the New Testament in 8 months. It was amazing. And when he translates his Bible, remember how we talked about this, that he didn't just put it into the German language. There was no German language as such. Germany was all these different, states, and they all had different dialects. And so Luther created this German Bible, and it was so beautiful and so wonderful. He kind of created a language, and by doing so, united the German people. It's really important to know that. There were other translations in German. They weren't very, popular, or they weren't that accessible. But Luther wrote in a way that connected people and connected with them. So yes, he translated the New Testament and then came back and got lots of help from Philip Melanchthon and others. It was a group project, and so that's one of the first experiences we have with all of our modern translations. They're usually not one person translating. It's a whole team, a whole committee of scholars doing the work. So he comes back from the Wartburg. Things are a mess. He starts preaching. He calms things down. He writes things. He wants reforms to proceed cautiously, with love. He's concerned about people's consciences. Some of the other reformers want to go faster than he does. Hey, let's commune in two kinds. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. Some were going around destroying the artwork in the churches, and he puts a stop to that immediately. But then we looked at how, though, that kind of led up to the Peasants' War, and we looked at Luther's role and the bad timing that he had with that, but how he was critical of both the peasants and the nobles. And he said to the nobles, you're responsible for this problem. It's the way you treat your people. But of course, he got on the peasants too, and he said, you shouldn't be revolted. You got to respect the authorities, and onward we went. Luther gets, as you remember, he gets a bad mark because of some of the harsh things he said. Well, he said a lot of harsh things, and we don't mince around with that. And yeah, I wish he'd have used different language. But if you take the whole of what he said, you would come away going, wow, what a balanced and wise counsel. But the problem is that his words and his writings came out at some of the worst times. Anyway, so we looked at the Peasants' War and the aftermath. Then we looked at his fabulous marriage to Catherine von Bora. And what an amazing woman, what an amazing part of the Reformation Catherine was. And I've got an exciting just little tidbit that we might have a visit from Martin in the weeks to come. Still working on it, but I'm pretty sure I've got them agreed that they're coming. So just know that that's in the future. So Luther's married to Katie and to Catherine von Bora. I love that there was another very important woman in the Reformation, and I have to apologize, I'm forgetting her name now, that the docudrama mentioned. And I was really happy to see that there's some interest in the role of women in the Reformation there. So, then finally, last time we met, back in May, we looked at this amazing conflict between Erasmus and Luther on what's called the bondage of the will. This, of course, is Erasmus, and I've taught you and told you that Erasmus was the mind of Europe in Luther's day. A humanist who believed, what do humanists believe? They believed that Aristotle and Plato and the Roman, the Greek civilization, and even the Jewish civilization before them, it was the golden era. And that if we went back and we applied Plato and Aristotle to our life together, we could have the golden era again. We've gotten away from that. So Erasmus was fluent in all kinds of languages, certainly the biblical language. He's a master at the Greek. And in fact, when Luther goes to translate into German the New Testament, whose Greek New Testament is he using? Erasmus's. Just came out. Erasmus had taken all the best manuscripts of the time and put together a Greek, New Testament. So important, and this is such a great thinker, and he's kind of a friend of Luther at the beginning. And he's sympathetic to Luther's call that the church needs to clean up its act. There's so much corruption, etc. But Erasmus is a humanist. He believes that human beings have the capacity to make things better. Get the right education, the right philosophy, etc. And we can pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and we can do better. And so if we just teach the right principles, So Erasmus would look at all these theological points that Luther's making, and he goes, will you just cut it out? I don't know, he probably didn't say that way. But you're getting all excited about trivial things. Let's just talk about how we live, and what the right way to live in this world is. Why are you getting so hung up on this stuff? And so Luther and Erasmus go at it over how do we understand the human being. So that we have the conflict between the difference between a humanistic understanding of a person and the Reformation understanding of a person. What was that? I'll tell you in a minute. But remember what Luther says about his battle with Erasmus. And I know there's one person in this congregation that did what I said and got the bondage of the will, Luther's writing, and read it backwards to forwards, which is the only way to understand it. Greg Patterson did that. Wow! And he's totally confused, I imagine. So, anyway, this is what Luther says about Erasmus in this conflict. We read this before, I just want to revisit this. So this is Luther talking about Erasmus. Moreover, and he's talking directly to Erasmus. I praise and commend you highly for this also, that unlike all the rest, you alone have attacked the real issue, the essence of the matter in the dispute, and have not wearied me with irrelevancies about the papacy. Wait, I thought the Reformation was all about against the Pope. No. About purgatory? I thought it was all about indulgences. Remember those 95 theses? No, he calls that an irrelevancy. And such like trifles, for trifles they are rather than the basic issues. with which almost everyone hitherto has gone hunting for me without success. You alone have seen the question on which everything hinges, and have aimed at the vital spot for which I sincerely thank you, Erasmus. Since I am only too glad to give as much attention to this subject as time and leisure permit. If those who have attacked me hitherto have done the same, and if those who now boast of new spirits, this is the more radical reformers, and new revelations would still do it, we should have less of sedition and sex and more of peace and concord. But God in this way, through Satan, punished our ingratitude. I would say, so Luther's going to say, well, God's punishing us because, that's because we're not getting to the heart, the meat of the matter. But he's thanking Erasmus, you've hit on the issue. And the real issue is, what is your anthropology? What is the condition of the human being? How much help do we need? Do we have free will? Do we have all free will? Do we have a little free will? Or do we have none at all? Erasmus said, we've got free will. We can read Aristotle, we can read Jesus, we can read, and we can learn and we can grow. And Luther said, we have no free will. How many times I've heard lay people come to me and say, it's a matter of free will, Pastor Bill, we all have free will. As a Lutheran, I would say, no, we don't. When it comes to choosing God, and this is where Luther will distinguish, when it comes to choosing God, we are stuck. We are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. As we say in our confession. Today we said captive to sin. Same thing. That's what Luther believed. That when he read the Scriptures, Erasmus would say, it's not so clear, Luther. And so Luther went right to the Scriptures and had this argument. No, we are sinners from our mother's womb. We do not have free will to choose God. We are stuck. And you might say, well, what do human beings do then? Well, this is what Luther has to deal with. So when he argues that when it comes to God, a person is completely in bondage, cannot choose God, and that sets the stage. And I tried to explain this last time, and I'm just going to hit it a little bit because I want to get to some new subjects today. It sets the stage for this. Luther believed that it was by God's grace, what? Alone. By faith alone. By Christ alone. You don't need the alones if you play a part in your salvation. If you're choosing, I chose, I made a decision, contributes one iota to your salvation, your justification, your forgiveness, your redemption, then scratch the alones. So, Luther found, today this comes across, when I talk to people about this subject, sorry the mic keeps cutting in and out. When I talk to people about this subject, they go, Lutherans are so pessimistic about human beings. I want to be a part of a religion that's optimistic about people, that's upbeat, that's happy, that's, come on. People aren't going to come to that church. You talk about sin all the time and all this stuff. That you're unworthy. But see, what people don't get is they hear that Luther said that we are worth less. That's what they hear. And there's a big difference between being worthless and worthy. We are completely unworthy, but we are worth everything. In fact, so much that God, His very self, took on flesh, the second person of the Trinity, and gave Himself to the cross for us. That's how much you count and matter. Luther felt that this was the issue because he believed that if you let some part of human achievement come into our relationship, being right with God, being right in justification, then once you open the door, you can't stop it. You can't have a little. It's either all or nothing. And so the very gospel was at stake. The very gospel is at stake. Now, we have this dialogue and this conversation now within Christianity. It's the ongoing dialogue we have with the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church to this day. It's also the ongoing dialogue we have with the more radical reformers of the Anabaptist tradition and the Pentecostal tradition, the Billy Graham tradition. We love Billy Graham, right? He was the great American evangelist. The end of every one of his things, great sermon, great preaching. He said, now you make a decision and come and say the sinner's prayer. Luther would have been, I think, frankly, very uncomfortable with that. I think he would have probably said, a better response would have been, come and die till you're trying to save yourself. Come to the foot of the cross. And I know that's what Billy Graham meant. So sometimes we get into semantics on this. But the danger is, and I'll finish here with revisiting this subject, which I didn't plan to spend this much time talking about. Bill, come on. The danger is that how good of a decision have you made? It's like that statement that Jesus says, you know, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth because you're neither hot nor cold. You're warm. You're lukewarm. Well, how hot do you have to be? You know, you see the trap in that? I mean, how good of a decision do you have to make? And so often I run into Christians whose decision and confidence falters and they think it's over. And I just say, you know what? God in Christ has claimed you and He's got hold of you and He's not ever going to let you go. And if you can't really believe that very much right now, that's all right. Do you have a mustard seed of faith? That's all you need. And that is even a gift of God. I tell you what, when you get to your deathbed, and our dear Esley, who's usually sitting over there, is right there today. You know, I'm not going to come and say, you know, have you given your life to Christ? I'm going to come and say, you know what? Christ has given His life for you. And you are in Him. You are in Christ. And He's got hold of you and He won't ever let you go. And that's you just hang on to that promise. So, maybe it's an issue of semantics. I don't know. But Luther felt like this was the thing of the Reformation. This was the thing. So, interesting, get you back into that. Get you back into that. There's still a reason for evangelism. We have to preach the word. Luther believed that. And he also said that, you know, we do need to respond in faith and love our neighbor. It's not like we just get to sit around and go, oh, goody, you died from that, that's fine. No, Luther would say, if you think that, you haven't really received the gift in the first place. I think that's what he would say. So maybe there's a difference between choosing and receiving. Maybe it comes down to that. Anyway, it's something we keep wrestling with. So he loses some allies. Erasmus, Karlstadt, who was wanting to push reforms faster, a guy named Munzer, who wanted Christians, the society, the government, to become Christian. And Luther said, no, you got to have two kingdoms. And so he's losing some allies at this point. So now not only does he have Rome against him, he has also other reformers against him. So with that, I want to just remind you of some of his friends. John Bugenhagen was his pastor and friend. Somebody I want to put his face up there and have you know his name. Because some of you are going to the Luther movie this Friday. I hope all of you are. $6. And if you've seen it before, see it again, and then we'll get to talk about it. You'll learn more the next time you see it. How many people have seen the Joseph Fiennes 2003? Come on, raise them high so I know. Not even a quarter. This is so cool. I'll see you on Friday. Okay? So, Philip Melanchthon. You got to know Philip Melanchthon was that great Greek scholar, a humanist, kind of like Erasmus. Melanchthon struggled with Luther's fight with Erasmus so much because he loved Erasmus and he loved Luther. He was like the best friends. They became so close, but they were so different, Melanchthon and Luther. And but you've got to know Melanchthon. As we get to 1530, Melanchthon is the author of the Augsburg Confession, which is the confession of our Lutheran Church. Remember Charles V, who comes into reign early on in the Reformation, and after Maximilian, I believe. And then he is the emperor all through Luther's life. of the Holy Roman Empire. So what I want to do now is take about 10 minutes and just get the political landscape of what's going on. Just to reset your mind. Where's the world at? What's going on in this period of time? And then we're going to get to some stuff that Luther wrote about the Turks. Very interesting. So, when it comes to the wider landscape, remember Pope Leo is from 1475 to 1521. What else happened in 1521? The Diet of Worms. Maybe it did him in. I don't know. Anyway, no, sure it did. He reigned a long time. He was of the Medici. Where's Kevin? What is it?
Medici.
Medici, thank you. Medici family. And he was more of an administrator. The popes at this time were administrators. They were, more than spiritual leaders, I guess you could say. That's something that Catholic theologians, I think, have said often. And so he was definitely that. And so he comes after Luther. He wants Luther gone. But he's not supportive of Emperor Charles either. And so Charles was not his pick. It wasn't the one he wanted. And so he died in 1521. A little known fact of the Reformation is that the Pope after him, Pope Adrian VI, in 1521, is elected as a surprise. We've had a surprise just recently, haven't we? And who was elected Pope? Pope Francis? Was he an Italian? No. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And in fact, I think it wasn't after Pope Adrian, it wasn't until like in was it Pope John? I'm out of my league here on this. But it wasn't until just recently that another person not from Italy was elected Pope. This guy becomes Pope, and he's from the Netherlands. I think Dutch, maybe. And he's Pope for a year and a half, and he dies. And, interestingly, he was no friend of Luther. He wanted the Edict of Worms enforced. He wanted to get rid of Luther. He said Luther was the fault for all the problems. But he agreed with the need for reform. He was more of a spiritual reformer and leader. Listen to what he said. We all, prelates and clergy, have gone astray from the right way. For long there is none that has done good. Not one. We shall use all diligence to reform before all things the Roman Curia, woe, whence perhaps all these evils have had their origin. Thus healing will begin at the source of the sickness. This is what the Pope Adrian, actually I think it's the 6th, I got a typo there, said. Whoa! So he's on board with it. We got to reform the church and the Curia, but he dies. And as elections go, sometimes you bounce around. And the next guy, Pope Clement, was of the Medici, thank you, Medici family. And the Curia had nothing to worry about from him. And so things kind of, as far as that kind of reform, most, I think historians would say, kind of stalled. But notice, Luther has like 1, 2, 3, and then 4 popes that reigned during his lifetime. So, just to give you an idea of what's going on with who's pope and whatnot, while the Reformation is progressing, where are we at in time? 1525-ish is about where I'm at now. Frederick the Wise, though, dies in 1525. This is a huge year. You remember Frederick the Wise? He's the elector who protects Luther. There's a question out there. Was he really a fan of the Reformation? In the movie that you're going to see on Friday, they do a beautiful job with this. Guess who is Frederick the Wise?
Peter Ustinov.
Peter Ustinov. Ooh, that's the best part of the movie, in my view. Best part. Best part. We don't know that they ever met. They saw each other at the Diet of Worms. The movie has them having a conversation, and I love it because I can't imagine they didn't have some secret conversation. Spalatin was the go-between. Frederick had to keep distance from Luther even while he protected him as he managed the politics. He was a political genius. As he balanced, he couldn't push Emperor Charles too far. He had to deal with the Curia and the Pope. He had this monk who couldn't stop writing and talking and making people mad. And he was a devout Roman Catholic whose biggest fortune was in what? Relics. He had the best collection of relics of all the land. And Luther kept preaching against them. Isn't that fascinating? That Luther, who is being protected by Prince Frederick, is hammering against the practice of these relics that people come and observe and they get, all these benefits from doing it. And they treat that really well. And you'll see that in the movie this Friday. There's a question about whether Frederick really believed in the Reformation. Just before he died, he had communion in both times, the bread and the wine. And there was no masses said at his funeral, just 2 days of preaching. I think he got it. So who comes after him? John the Steadfast, who is Frederick's nephew. And John is an even bigger supporter of the Reformation. Loves Luther almost too much. He doesn't have Frederick's political wiles. But nonetheless, an ardent supporter of the Reformation. So when you look at the Holy Roman Empire, and what is this? You see France over here and Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and then Italy comes down in here, what's today's current Italy. This was the Holy Roman Empire. It started, back in the 800s, 900s is when the Roman... So this has been the reality for a long time. When you look at the Holy Roman Empire, there are all these little estates. Here's Saxony here, and Marburg, and Hesse. Philip of Hesse was a big supporter of the Reformation. What I want you to know is that as the Reformation ideas began to spread, first in universities and the debates, but then amongst the common people, and Luther comes down here to Worms for Worms is in the southern part of the country, so he comes down there for that big diet, and that big conflict, and that big discussion. What I want you to know that different estates, different princes, either sided with the Reformation or against it. So, and this is maybe a better map to see the specific, areas. And it's complicated. It's like, there's only 7 electors, 7 leaders of these areas that elected the Holy Roman Emperor. But there were more than that as far as princes go. There were like 14 or more. So it's complicated and I don't claim to understand. But I just want to give you that. Here's the 7 electors with Emperor Charles. Where do you see... Oh, look who's that. That's Frederick. You can tell by his beard, right? Yeah? So anyway, you've got the Holy Roman Empire and these princes, and what starts happening is the South tends to say, we're siding with the Roman Catholic Church. We are devout people of the church, and we do not agree with the Reformation. So the South unites in 1524, and then the North follows suit. What say you, they want to say? Luther, what should we do? And Luther says this is a summary. No offense, that's rebellion. We have to respect the temporal authority of the state, and that means Emperor Charles. No rebellion. But if they attack us, you can defend yourself. So he says, no offense, but you can have defense. So there's the league, the Torgau League, which really becomes the forerunner to the Smalkaldic League, which is these different princes and estates who band together, put their armies together to start a physical military defense against the threat of Emperor Charles. Because after all, these people, in his view, are committing rebellion because who are they supporting? Luther. And if you support Luther, remember, it wasn't just Luther that was under the ban, but anybody who supported him would be killed. By this time, Luther grieves greatly because some of his friends have been martyred and killed. All right, I don't want to put you guys all to sleep here with all these things, but I want to get you on speed. So, then there's what's called the Diet of Spire. And Philip of Hesse, this is a great story. They have a diet, a big meeting. They want Emperor Charles to be there, but he's too busy. He's not there. I'll tell you why in a minute. So he sends, I think, was it his brother? Can't remember now. But anyway, so he sends a representative, and you know what Philip of Hesse, one of the princes, does? Has barbecues meat on Friday. Has barbecue. You know, you've heard of the throwing the tea over the ship, you know, with our revolution. You know, he barbecued meat on Friday. That was his statement. So at the Diet of Speyer, these princes, mainly from the north, get together. And they come up with different sayings. And you know what they call them? Protests. You want to know where the word Protestant comes from? It comes from the Diet of Speyer, which will reconvene in 3 years because the emperor didn't come. And once again, the emperor doesn't show up. And that's where we get the word Protestant. Protester. That comes from this diet and at this time in the Reformation. All these princes typically would put the VDMA in English, verbum domini manat et aeternum. You can see how horrible I am at Latin. But means the word of the Lord remains forever. In their flags, it always had those four. The word of the Lord remains forever. So you start to see the Reformation, which is a theological conviction, starting now to move into politics in states and territories, and we start to get into the temporal realm about what's going to happen. How's this all going to hold together? You might be asking, what question are you asking?
Where's
Charles? What's he doing while all this is happening? This is who Charles is worried about. This is a gentleman named Suleiman. This is from Luther's works about, anyway, I just wanted to grab it because I just want to read it because it's the best, better than I can say it. For more than 3/4 of a century, the Ottoman Turks had cast a menacing shadow over Europe. Constantinople had fallen to them in 1453. That's not that far, you know, what, 100 years before Luther? Or less than that, 75. And by the end of the 15th century, they had consolidated their power up to the Danube River. Up to the east and south, Persia, Syria, and Egypt fell under Turkish sway. Under the rule of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Turks turned their attention once more towards Christian Europe. In 1520, they captured Belgrade. The following year, Rhodes fell to the Muslims. Then in 1526, King Louis II of Hungary was killed and his troops soundly defeated in the Battle of Marx on the Danube. This defeat sent a wave of terror over Europe. Only pressing domestic problems which demanded undivided and immediate attention prevented Suleiman from pursuing his advantage. So he has the advantage. He's ready to invade Europe. And here the Reformation's going on. Why was Charles, didn't he just squash Luther, right? And squash these German princes? He was busy. In a weird way, Sultan Suleiman kept Charles busy, and the Reformation had time to flourish. I bet you're asking, and what I want to spend the last 20 minutes on, what was Luther's take on all that? What did Luther have to say about the Turks and all of this? I think it's going to surprise you. The first thing he says early on, going back to the indulgence controversy and the 95 Theses, if you read all those, you'll hear him say, you know what? The Turks are God's hand of judgment against us because of the corruption and the lack of concern for the gospel and the general affairs, and the lack of repentance among God's people. So he says, that must be God's judgment. Luther is definitely, 500 years ago, a person who believes that God's directing history. There's no question about that. I know there's some struggles and challenges with some of that, but nonetheless, that's what he believed. And so that's the first thing he says. And then after years of requests, he writes a document called On War Against the Turk. It's written in 1529. We'll look at some writings about this. He says, those who say that we must take up the sword in the name of Jesus Christ and beat the Muslim are completely out to lunch. When it comes to crusades, no way. You can't justify that in the name of Christ. Interesting. Now, so you might think that, well, so was he just like open the doors, let the Turks come in? You know, I mean, what did he think? He said, no, it's not a holy war. Why do you... I clicked it too soon. I was going to ask you, why do you think Luther felt that? What do you think the problem was that? It was a confusion of the two kingdoms. You remember how I said there's two kingdoms? There's the temporal government, that kingdom, the left hand of God, and the right hand of God is the kingdom of Christ. It's the Beatitudes that Jesus is teaching. It's the church. He says you don't go to war on the basis of the right-hand kingdom. You don't do that. No, you might go to war because you're a citizen of a country that's being invaded, and that's your duty as a citizen to defend your country. He would say to Emperor Charles, absolutely you go to war with Turkey, you defend your territory. But Christian, you don't get to do it and say, I'm the Christian against the Muslim. You see the difference? Now this, I think, is amazing for someone 500 years ago. And something that I don't hear anybody talk about today.
Certainly applies today, though, doesn't it?
It does in some interesting ways. Yep. Well, and that's what I guess you get to wrestle with. We'll hopefully get some time to do that. I want you to read some of what Luther says. So Christians can and should fight, but not as the church, but rather on behalf of the state in that kingdom. He would say the same counsel to military people today. You know, I've worked with lots of veterans and lots of active duty people who struggle with what they've had to do in war. And, you know, one, God's forgiveness and grace and mercy is the first answer. The second answer is there's a difference between the right hand and the left hand kingdom. And when you go to war, that's the left hand kingdom. You are doing your duty as a soldier to defend your country and to fight for what is right and just. Hopefully, prayerfully, it's a just war. So then the next thing he said, when it comes to how you battle the Turk from a Christian standpoint, we have to clean up our act. We have to repent. We have to seek God's forgiveness and get right with the gospel. And if we do that, God's going to save us. That's kind of the summary of what Luther said. Let's read some of it. So this is when he's talking about being goaded into getting into this subject. Therefore, it's necessary for me to write about these things for my own sake and that of the gospel, to defend ourselves, not because of the blasphemers. These are people who are saying there were lots of people who were saying, Luther caused this whole problem. If he'd just stop making an issue, we'd be stronger and we could take on the Turks. And actually, he's hoping the Turks will come in because he's against Rome and he's against... So all kinds of people were saying all kinds of things that were incorrect about him. I do not think they are worth my saying a single word to them in my defense. For to them the gospel must always be a stench and savor of death to death. Don't mince words, Luther, as always. As they have deserved by their willful blasphemy. But I must write so that innocent consciences may no longer be deceived by these slanderers and made suspicious of me or my doctrine. And so they may not be deceived into believing that we must not fight against the Turks. Because many people were saying, because Luther said it's not Christ against the Muslims, that he says that you shouldn't fight the Muslims. No, it's on what basis you defend your country in that situation. In the second place, we must know who the person, the man is, who is to make war against the Turk, so that he may be certain that he has a commission from God and is doing right. How do you know if we go against war against the Turks, we're doing right? He must not plunge into avenge himself or have some other mad notion or reason. So it's not out of vengeance. He must be sure of this, so that win or lose, he may be in a state of salvation and a godly occupation. There are two of these men, and there ought to be only two. The one is named Christian, and the other Emperor Charles. There's the two kingdoms. Emperor Charles, you need to get your military and you need to fight and defend the country. Christian, you need to get your act together, you need to repent, you need to pray, you need to get on your knees, you need to be about the gospel, and God will take care of us. Two different ways, two different kingdoms. Luther will go on to say, but what motivated me most of all was this. They undertook to fight against the Turk in the name of Christ and taught and incited men to do this, as though our people were an army of Christians against the Turks, who were enemies of Christ. This is absolutely contrary to Christ's doctrine and name. Interesting. If I were emperor, even stronger, listen to this. If I were emperor, king, or prince, and were in a campaign against the Turk, I would exhort my bishops and priests to stay home and attend to the duties of their office. Praying, fasting, saying mass, preaching, and caring for the poor. He probably would amend it today and say, be on the battlefield and be doing your office to the soldiers on the field, like our military chaplains have done. And two, if I were a soldier and saw a priest's banner in the field or a banner of the cross, even though it was a crucifix, I should run as though the devil were chasing me. And even if they won a victory by God's decree, I should not take any part in the booty or the rejoicing. Now, so what does Luther think about the Turk and the Muslim of his day? He'll go on from here. If you want to read it, I'll put it online. You just let me know. He'll go on and talk about all the problems of Islam and say that Muslims are being motivated by the devil as far as their religion. He says the same thing about the Pope and about other Christians too. So it's not just an so this is the hyperbole we're in the Reformation. This is the language we used back then. I found this that I thought summed up his problem with the Turks and Islam. The Turk is also a papist, for he believes that he will become holy and be saved by works. Luther has the Quran. It was in his library. He has a translation of it. I forget how that came to him, but he had read it, and he sums up three things of problems he has with the Quran. First one is what? Well, it puts Muhammad above Christ. And so it blasphemes and demeans Jesus Christ. Because Islam might even believe in a resurrection, but they don't believe Jesus is God. That's a huge offense. Their motto is only one God, or God is the only God. So who are they sliding there? Well, they're sliding Christians who believe Jesus is God. They think we're polytheists. So Luther theologically said, Islam is completely bankrupt. It's completely wrong. Muslims are wrong. And he goes on and says a number of things. Why? He also feels they were, in his day, against marriage because they had multiple wives and all of this stuff. And so there were a lot of it's that time versus any other time. But some of it's still relevant today. So what do we do with what Luther had to say about the invasion of the Turks and Muslims of his day? It's a very different day today. We live in a country where there's freedom of religion. What applies, what doesn't apply is kind of interesting. You get to spend about 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back and regather and finish off together with that. What would you can disagree with Luther completely. You get to do that. You're a Lutheran. You get to disagree. So, but what do you think about what Luther had to say, and how might it apply to us today? Just kind of gather up with the 4 people at your little square table, or if you've got somebody next to you, you can just turn and talk to one person. If you're in the back, you can do that, or maybe if there's 4 or 3 of you together, turn and talk. Say, what do you think about this? How might it apply? Take 2 or 3 minutes. Engage with that. Couple more minutes, and then I want to hear what you think about this. All right, hang in there because I want to hear what you have to say. Finish up your point. 20 seconds. I see a lot of you. There's some that are really engaged here. So, can I have some mic runners so we can? What happened to the other mic? Oh, Ken's already got it. Great. So, what do you finish up your point there in your group? And keep going, but we'll keep going in large groups and run out of time as usual. How do you apply what Luther says, or what do you think? Where's he on track? Where's he off track? Anybody want to take a shot? Want to put something up there? Carol is goading Ron on. Yeah.
Today, what we have is our government has the support of fighting all the people of terrorists all over the world.
Right.
And it's up to us to pray for them and keep armed. It's almost the same as it was back in the old days.
Right. So it's different. It's that we don't have this huge group invading our country, but we have this terrorist threat, and it's the job of our government to protect us. That's right. Now, where does it get complicated, right? Is that by and large, a lot of the terrorists, not all, are from a certain expression of Islam. Not all. We've had plenty of terrorists who do violent, horrible acts that are not associated with that. We have violence all over. But our government is in general to protect us. Okay, yeah, so that's the same. Now, I also know, though, that the real radical violent part of Islam wants a religious war. They want this to be framed as Christians against Muslims. I think Luther would become uncomfortable about that. Anyway, okay, please. Yeah.
I think it was the thing that isn't looked at too often is that this brand of Muslim thing
It's good. Yep.
really will have war with other Muslims to take over, as is happening in Indonesia now. That was a very moderate form of the Muslim faith, and they're turning radical because these guys come in and radicalize.
That's correct. Muslims, those violent, terrorist, radical, whatever you want to call it, expression of Islam is killing many Muslims as well as Christians. It's very, very true. Yeah.
Well, I had two thoughts. One was you could take some of Luther's writings, maybe the one or two that you showed just before this screen, and clean up the English a little bit so that it sounds a little more modern, but says the same thing, and put anybody's name under it. It would be true today. Okay? And accepted today. But my thought on the holy wars, quote unquote, is that people were invited to come and fight these holy wars, and they would be forgiven their sins and go to heaven and
Yeah.
get treasures.
Right.
Okay, so the last point is, thankfully, in our country, we have all kinds of religions, so it would never be Christians against Muslims, because we have all kinds of people in our military. We have Buddhists, we have Jews, we
That's
have,
right.
you know, all
We have Muslims.
We have Muslims.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So they can't.
Pull that on us in that way, but the government, our state, as they're referring to it here,
Right.
just has to remember what their job is.
Yes.
And
That's
that's to protect us,
Yep.
and then we'll support them.
Yep. Yeah, good. More. Sorry, I don't know why our reception, I'll change the channels. Anybody else? So how do we do yes, please, Julie. Yeah.
Kind of tag on that, our group had a discussion about separation of state
Yes.
and church.
Yeah.
And we didn't get into this last year, but the Coach Kennedy from
Okay. Right.
I think some people want religion or church to be in our school system. And I don't believe that as an educator, because there are so many different faiths.
Right.
That if we invite that into our school system,
Yeah.
then you don't know what's
Where
going
do you
on.
stop? Where do you stop? Yeah.
Where do you
Or
stop?
Where does it
So-
stop, or what are the limits? Yeah. So that is let me just talk real briefly on that subject, since you opened up that can of worms. Thank you for doing that. That's what we're about here. So the challenge, of course, is the framers of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights didn't want a state church. They didn't want the state to say, this is the religion of the land. Where that's evolved to is we got to get God out of everything that's public. And I don't think they would have been comfortable with that. They put God on our money. I mean, I don't think they would have, of course, I don't know they could have envisioned the religious pluralism that we have in our country today. Back then it was Catholics and the Protestants. You know the origin of that Establishment Clause? You shall make no, what does it say?
No law in the bridge of freedom of religion.
Right,
Expression of
yeah.
religion.
So you will not say. So there were Baptist preachers in the South that were going around getting all kinds of converts. So the Church of England, the Anglican pastors and folks, they were in control of the municipalities. They passed laws against preaching because the Baptists were stealing their people. Thomas Jefferson took sympathy on the Baptists, and he was as far away from being a Baptist as you could be. But he didn't think that was right. That's where the Establishment Clause came from. Interesting. So, but nonetheless, so Coach Kennedy is an interesting thing because, the school district has a policy. Was he breaking the policy? Was he breaking a temporal government position, as a Christian is called? But then there's another side to that. He was practicing his religion, and he's being kept from practicing as a religion, etc. And the debate goes on. I know that a lot of you would like to comment on that, but we're a little bit out of time. I want to move. If I've been unjust to Coach Kennedy, please, Ken, give me a couple seconds. Yeah, please, go ahead. You want to speak? Yeah.
Is Islam due for a reformation?
Yeah, okay, that's where I want to go. I think there are plenty of people within Islam and imams, etc., that are calling for that and believe that. And that's their house, and I don't know about that. But I guess this is my concern. How do we fight the fight today? Is there a fight to be fought? We're very scared about using that language. But I think if we can keep this distinction that Luther's talking about, I think it's really important. For instance, I should be by the side of an imam whose mosque has been defaced or demeaned in any way. I should stand up for every Muslim who's being persecuted in their faith. Because we believe in freedom of religion in this country. That's a beautiful gift. But when it comes to what they believe, I'm going to stand and say, you know what? I think you guys are wrong and we are right. Now that's not politically correct. I'm sorry. I I understand. But that doesn't mean I'm going to take up arms, or I'm going to fight or hurt. So, no, it just seems Jesus, he's either risen from the dead, he either is God or he isn't. You can't have it both ways. Either you get saved by checking off all the boxes like Islam says you get saved, and you're never sure if you've been good enough, or you're saved by the grace of Christ. We need to let the minds clash, but keep the fists down, as Luther said. That's what he said. It's in one of the museums, the Luther Museum in Germany. I saw it. Let the minds clash, but keep the fists down. Islam wants to reign. Even the moderate, beautiful Muslim who's a fine citizen of this country, they want to spread Islam all over the world. Well, so do I. I want to spread Christianity. Either they're right. So I think we need to have a healthy debate, you know. But I'm concerned that we're naive about Islam. I am. I'm sorry. I said that to one pastor in the ELCA, and they just about attacked me. Because they thought I was being so hateful. I'm not being hateful. I'm just saying I think we're naive. I've been in Ethiopia. I know how Islam works in a lot of other countries, different from this country. So I just think we need to wake up a little bit about it. PLPS, my former alma mater, Cal Lutheran took over because they couldn't make it anymore. Cal Lutheran decided, you know, we're going to sell the property, you know, because it's not viable up there on the top of beautiful Berkeley, looking down on the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge. It's too expensive to maintain, so that's fine, they're going to sell it. Well, guess who owns it now? Muslim seminary. And evidently they're doing well enough that they could spend I don't know, 10 million, I don't know how much they probably bought it for. So that's fine. They have every right to do that. I got no problems. But, you know, I think there is a battle to be fought, but not with the fists. About what's the truth about God. And we can still love each other. We can still go out there and defend the rights of the poor together and work for the betterment of our community together with Muslims and Jews and Christians and Buddhists. We can all go out there and work to make the world a better place together. But when it comes, I just think we need to, you know, are we still trying to make the disciples or not? Okay, there you go. That's what I got to really dump on you on that. So, all right, I got my word across. You didn't get a chance. We can pick this up next week. Hey, thank you. We're going to roll into the catechism soon. Luther bringing education to Germany. Go in peace, serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.